Just a quick introduction to, I guess, my method for scanning in JMStudio. So most of my scanning I'll do in easy scan mode. Table scan can be useful, especially because it changes the orientation of the scanner from vertical to horizontal, but I find it a bit limiting at the moment due to it stopping after about 312 frames, so a single revolution is what it expects to do. So you can see I'm here in easy scan mode. Even though I'm planning on scanning in texture mode, I'll generally start out in geometry mode, as you saw just there, so that I can set the brightness to the correct values. The overexposure indicators don't show while you're in texture mode, so it's generally a good place to start. In terms of getting the scanner itself orientated onto the model, the primary thing that I'll be looking at is the structured light that hits the model itself. So you can look at that on the screen somewhat through the preview in geometry mode. You can see kind of where those lines hit the model. The primary place that I'll look at that is the model itself though, so I generally don't spend too much time looking at the scan distance indicator there on the left hand side. I find that it doesn't necessarily give you an indication of the exact best spot for a particularly sized model. It kind of averages it out over the entire size of what it sees. So if it's looking at a turntable, etc., it kind of throws off where the exact focus might be. But if you're in a fairly dark room and you're looking at the model itself, and you can see the light hitting it from the scanner, so both when I've got easy mode on a turntable, but also when I'm hand scanning, I'll generally be looking at where is that light falling on the model itself. Is it getting into all the crevices? Do we have shadows, etc.? So as the first quick scan, you might have noticed there halfway through the preview, so the green section kind of fell out of step with where the scan itself was. So it looked like some of those features had doubled up. When I first started using the cell scanner in JMStudio, I would essentially cancel the scan every time I saw one of the features doubled up. You'll find that you don't necessarily need to do that. So oftentimes it'll fix up those doubled up features while it's doing this rebuild stage. If that fails as well, you do also have the option to have a look at individual frames and delete a section or move them to a new scan, but you can see that doubled up wing fixed itself just fine while it was rebuilding from the individual frames. One of the downsides of using the easy scan over the table scan is that you'll need to manually remove the table, so it won't automatically delete as it does with the table scan. So generally with the table scan, as soon as it finishes, you'll find that the table itself will be pink, and all you need to do is when the scan finishes, hit the delete key, and you'll find that it automatically deletes the table most times for you. So this is just a second scan, different orientation. As you can see, it's essentially the same size, the same shape, the same distance. You can somewhat see the scan lines on the table itself to give you an idea of what depth is currently in focus. A little bit annoyingly, you can see that the table doesn't quite match up with the orientation of the scanner, so I've got it on the tripod in horizontal mode, but because it's in easy scan, that's actually showing up as being on its side. So you can see here I'm just moving the camera to get a different angle from a different height. And again, the main aim there is looking at the model itself, seeing where the structured light is on the model, so you can't see it in the preview unfortunately in texture mode. But turning my head to the right and looking at the model on the table, I can see that it is in focus, and the primary details are all in focus. Sometimes due to the really low depth of field, you might need to take a couple of circles, so one at a closer distance and one further away, because some features won't show up on the model depending on how far away they are. And here, just as an example, I was trying to show how much scan data you can kind of get into a single frame. When I first started out, I would have done this in I guess, multiple scans and join them together, but instead in this case what I'm doing is leaving the model in place, leaving it on the turntable and moving the camera instead, letting it do a couple of rotations, moving it, making sure it's in focus and doing the same again. Every now and then you'll see that the preview in the center of the screen will get slightly delayed, just depending on your machine, your system resources, how it's writing to disk, etc. So occasionally it'll be a little bit slow or behind. That'll generally happen as you've got more frames captured. But you'll find, yeah, it will settle down and kind of catch up and continue on, at least. So here we are, same scan, third position. Again, looking at where the focus is on the model. You'll occasionally see some overblown features just from increased brightness. I was mainly performing this scan just as an example of kind of how this scanning process works. So looking at the settings on the right hand side, the sensitivity is actually higher than I would normally run at. So I normally keep the sensitivity as low as possible, generally on the minimum for most scans, and only really if there are features that it can't pick up, so dark sections, shiny sections, etc. I might increase the sensitivity. So this is one of the higher sensitivity scans that I've done, and you'll notice when we get to the editing phase it's quite rough as a result, so there'll be a lot of noise around the model. But I thought that's probably a good example of showing how to clean that up. In terms of the lighting in the room at the time that I was scanning, it was quite dim. I find that even scanning during the day with the blinds partially letting in some sunlight can be enough to throw off the scans. And the more frames you capture, the slower it is to get out of this rebuild phase, which is also what was quite frustrating before I realized you could delete frames after the fact, because if you were running a really long scan and it doubled up and caused a problem at the end, you'd be tempted to just cancel out. I might definitely avoid that going forward, as sometimes it'll fix it itself, and other times you can just split that scan into two parts and then align them. See down the bottom right there the memory counter. So up to almost 13 gig of memory. Again, where lots of frames and high detail can have its downsides. Performing this demo on a Ryzen 5800 X3D, so an 8-core chip with a higher CPU cache. It's currently got 32 gig of RAM. From testing, I think you could get away with 16, but I wouldn't really want to go any lower, because as you can see, some of the scans do get up 13, 15, 16 gigs, so to avoid paging them out to disk, that's probably not a good thing. And everything's going to a Gen 4 SSD as well. There we are, so 3.2 gig file for that particular scan. So there is some noise, particularly around the top, generated from reflections. You can see there I'm just changing the view mode to the parallel rather than perspective. I find it's a bit easier to clean up. So my favourite selection mode there you have seen is the rectangle. I find that's a bit easier, particularly with items that do have square sides or square features, rather than trying to trace around things with the lasso tool. You can select a few points on the base itself and use the right click function to select the base with a couple of millimeters extra. But I have found it sometimes doesn't work particularly well, just because the base, as you can see there, is more than kind of the 3 or 4 millimeters that you might set it to. It does give you more flexibility that you can come in here, change the angle, and remove anything that you want to keep. Just to undo a selection, so generally creating a selection is Control. If you wanted to undo it, you'd Control Alt and select it again. As you can see, it's quite slow. There are a lot of points in the table, just because it was sitting right in front of the scanner for so long. So you can see we've dropped from 3.2 gigabytes down to 1684 megabytes just by deleting the base. So it's definitely advantageous to get rid of it as soon as possible if you have been scanning on the table for a while. So you can see quite a lot of detail appears to be in there. So I'll go through and do some of those deletions with the other one. So process here, use a rectangular select, delete the base as deep as it goes. So just go through the alignment process roughly. So you can see there I have 2 aligned, and I want to add a third. So in general, you want to always add them in the order that you want them to go in terms of priority of position. So you can see there, because I selected HandScan 4 last, it will align HandScan 4 to the 2 above it rather than the other way around. One of the things that definitely helps with the auto align is getting your model as close as possible to being aligned before you even start. So you can see on the left there I selected the manual tool. Which essentially lets us go and make a change to the position of a model. It can be a little bit finicky in terms of which model you're selecting. It seems to be one of the few tools that doesn't only work on the scan that you've currently got selected. So you'll find that there are a few bugs that will go through here and try and do fine alignments, because I'll end up accidentally rotating the one in the background as opposed to the foreground for the selected scan. See, it didn't quite get there. It actually made the first 2 that I already had aligned come out of alignment. So what I'll do is I think just undo that and try again. Instead of trying to align all 3, my general process is I'll select the one that I want to align to first, and then select a single model to go on top of it. You'll see here that issue where even though I've selected HandScan 4, I'll accidentally end up moving HandScan 1 or 2, which are the 2 that I already had in position and don't want to move. Rotate tool itself is also a little bit hard to get unless you zoom out. Using this modification tool, you need to click on the points themselves, so it's not as easy to use as a standard rotate where you can just scroll out and then click right at the edge of the screen and do a rotate. I normally would have given up by now and used a 3-point alignment, but I just thought for the sake of showing how this thing works, it's probably best to persevere and see if I can get it to work. As I said, it is a little bit finicky. I'd only just discovered this tool, so I've gotten a bit better since I first did this. It definitely takes some practice. It would be easier if you can select which model it impacts as well. It's easier there if you can click on a particular side or end of the model to make that rotation. So you can see in this case, I've gone back to only doing an auto align on 2 scans at a time, and it's worked much better. So now turning on the 3 that I've aligned, it worked quite well. So turn off number 2, number 4, keeping number 1 as the source of truth. So we'll instead try to align scan 5 to scan 1. Again, rotate so you can pick a particular end. So you've got it fairly well aligned. Should be as simple as just dragging it over the other one and doing a single auto align. As you can see there, I've got a bug where hand scan 5 was selected first. So if I'd proceeded there, it would have moved 1 instead of 5. But you can see that icon is the target. You definitely want to make sure that your target is targeted. It's looking pretty good. Again, we'll go back, make sure the target's correct, do an auto align, just for those last few points. So that should be all of the scans that we're going to keep aligned. As you can see, especially with those higher sensitivity values when we're scanning, there is a lot of noise for us to learn how to remove. As I said, double clicking will take you into the individual frames where you can split scans, move them around. So just double clicking will get you there. So there's a mixture of the lasso align as well as the rectangle. Rectangle working a bit better for flat areas. So quite rough. So I'm selecting the model, so then I'll need to invert that selection. Select the noise instead. Advantage of doing it that way is you'll also select noise that's a long way away from the model. It's a fairly time consuming process because you'll need to make the same selections on every one of your scans unless you've already merged them. It's been quite rough, can be beneficial. Find that one of the advantages of JMStudio is that because it smooths out the model so much when it does the fusion process, it's a bit less susceptible to the noise around your model, although it can still, if there are fairly dense blobs of noise, they'll still show up as extra zits and blobs and whatever around your model. You do have the remove noise tool. One of the things that I've learnt through testing is that it doesn't actually remove noise until after the fusion has taken place. So if you've got blobs that show up afterwards, it'll remove those. But as a result of that, you don't necessarily need to run it automatically until you've seen the result of the fusion and do it as a secondary step. See, they're just using the lasso tool to do a rough selection. And I've obviously picked the wrong scan. It's again one of those slight annoyances in that you can't tell which scan points are in if you've got multiple scans visible. So a little bit of trial and error before I realised what I was doing wrong. See, I think here's another problem, is that I'm in the process screen and not the align screen, so none of my selections are actually taking effect. It's a nice trap for new and old players. That looks a bit better. Pretty happy with that. Again, the more you go back and rotate the model, have a closer look, the more you find mistakes or misalignments or things that you might have made along the way. As much as possible, picking the right selection tool can make your life easier as well. In that case, it's a fairly flat piece, so selecting with the rectangle is much quicker. Rectangle only sits in one direction, so you need to rotate the model to keep it square. Focusing on the bigger areas is always more important, especially as the noise gets smoothed so much during processing. There's certainly big colourful areas like those above the model there, the reflections, the shadows. You'll find streams of noise coming off edges is most likely. So just wanted to show you also how to run through a table scan. As I said, I don't use it particularly often, but it should be as simple as the instructions say, click on table scan. The first step is the initial scan. So in that, you're supposed to leave the table or the scanning service completely empty. And then it's going to have a look at what that service looks like so they can automatically recognize and remove it in the next step. As you can see here, I've got just a blob of blue tack stuck on there, which is going to hold up the model in the next scan. There were some underneath features that didn't quite get picked up in the previous ones. You can see it doesn't treat anything that's not a flat surface in this case as part of the table, so it won't automatically remove the blue tack, but you can see it's still recognizing the table underneath. Essentially, once that's done a circle, you can just hit stop, and then that number 1 will be saved for your actual scan, and that number 1 should stay saved as well if you append additional scans as well. So if you don't move the table or you don't move the camera around too much, you should be able to just come back and hit the scan button again, or shortcut, you can spacebar to start it off. One of the annoying features there you'll notice is there was no preview of what the scanner was seeing while you were setting up the model. I'm told that in the next version of JMStudio there should be an option where that comes on automatically, so you can use that to align your model, have a look at the structured light pattern on it, and make sure it's in focus before you hit the scan button in table mode. One of the primary downsides to table mode at the moment is that it will only do a single revolution, so about 313 frames or something before it stops, unless you're using the multi-axis turntable, where you can actually program how many revolutions, backwards, forwards, change angle, etc. So it's probably the one advantage it has in table mode, as opposed to trying to do it manually and just move the camera angle yourself. You can see now that's finished scanning. It's also automatically selected all the points for the table itself. The nice feature there is if you don't do any manual changes or undo the selection, you can just hit the delete key. Once you hit the edit mode screen, it'll automatically delete the table for you. So I'm mostly going to skip over any cleanup on this latest table scan that we've added in. But one of the things that I wanted to put in as a quick tip when trying to clean up around your model is it can be quite difficult to see at sometimes. So you can see the default there is to only show keyframes. If you change that setting across to show all frames, the points themselves become a lot more pronounced, so anything that is junk data or noise is a lot easier to see and remove. That may also sometimes help you from deleting something that looks like it might be noise but is actually data that you want to keep when you get more of it together. rotating the model, looking for junk, anything that is large, looks like it's going to be out of place, is the main things you want to remove. Some fringing, etc. around the edge of the model will either be removed by smoothing in JM, or it can be removed by noise filters, other applications, which we'll go over shortly. Another thing to keep in mind is when you turn on those see all frames, you need to do that per scan. You can't just turn it on for all the scans you've currently got open. So as you're rotating, looking around the model, you probably want to go through, turn on show all frames on all of the scans that you've done, just so you can see the totality of what the point cloud looks like. Once you're happy that there's no big glaring chunks or blobs of points extraneous to the main model, you go ahead and move on to the meshing stage, Fusion. Fusion in that it's taking a whole bunch of frames and turning them into a single point cloud and then meshing it. So on that process stage, as I was mentioning, I generally don't use Simplify at all. I find that's better to do after the fact, so get as much detail into your mesh as possible, and then you can look at rebuilding the mesh, changing it from triangles to 4-point splines or whatever it might be that you're looking for. In terms of repair gaps, if you're staying with the model from Fusion, that can definitely help. If you do have large holes in your model, it'll make it kind of watertight for you. So make sure you've got Simplify off, turn on texture mapping if you want the texture information. Having the texture on can also help add a bit of fake detail to the model as well. In terms of the refinement there, I don't generally see any purpose in doing anything other than the highest level, especially since the latest update, when it's gone to just 3 possible values. If there were small increments, yeah, you could do a bit of a test and see what the best result you could get was. As you can see, the CPU usage is fairly well shared across cores, only a few, and the memory itself is fairly well under control if you've kind of got that 16 gig and above. This last part of the process is always the texture mapping. And we're done. The first thing you're going to want to do there is to go through the remove noise filter to get rid of those blobs. You can see we've got a nicely closed off model. It's watertight. It's got the meshing, the texture applied to it properly. Unfortunately, when you turn off the texture, you can see just how much smoothing happened as part of that meshing process. Unfortunately, with the way that the Fusion is run through in JMStudio, a lot of that detail, even though it was there in the point cloud, just gets lost. So, I mean, this is great for an easy way of creating a model that you could simply take out 3D print without too much cleanup. But if you're really after that micro detail, something like a resin print or blowing something up, you're definitely going to want to look at alternative options for doing that meshing outside of the JMStudio, which we'll have a look at in the next video.